Good afternoon. Quick show of hands, how many of you have heard me speak before? A couple of you? Okay, got it. So my name is Salim Ismail. I wrote this book, Exponential Organizations, a few years ago about how do you scale new companies in a very rapid way. And it came from an experience that I had 10 years ago when I was the head of innovation at Yahoo. I was running Yahoo's incubator, and I found that if you try disruptive innovation in any large organization, the immune system attacks you, right? The antibodies come out and nothing happens. You get into a political discussion and you get stuck. And it was staggering to me that even as a company as advanced as Yahoo, you had this problem. And so I kind of was thinking about that, left that. How many of you have heard of Singularity University? Show of hands, more of you? Okay, so I'm the founding CEO there. Helped build it out for the first few years. And we would get this question from technology executives and CEOs that came through our programs. Okay, I get the technology, I get the disruption. What the hell do I do on Monday when I get back to the office? And the book that I wrote was essentially a response to that. How do you think of adapting this new world? And basically almost all of my work now is focused on how do you solve this immune system problem, both at the organization level, but also at the institutional level. Because in the public sector, the existing policy is the immune system, right? You try and update education and the teachers go bananas, or you try and update transportation, you have the fight between taxi and the Ubers, and it's just not a very fun conversation, and it's a stuck dialogue. And so about 3 years ago, the global CIO for Procter & Gamble approached us and said, hey, we'd like to work with you. And I said, we're about to go through about a 3-year dance, because we noticed that in a big company, it takes about 3 years for all the C-suite to wake up and realize that they're really in big trouble when you look at some of the technologies that you've heard about today and we're now seeing and getting exposure to. And so we created with them what we now call an Exo Sprint, which is a 10-week process that we run inside large corporations. And we find we can move the leadership, culture, and management thinking 3 years ahead in that 10 weeks. So we've kind of found a hack to how do you hack culture and rapidly move it ahead to increase the metabolism of these legacy organizations. Then we thought, okay, could we apply that to the public sector? Because that's really the bigger problem. So we formed a nonprofit here in Miami. I've been living here in Miami for the last few years, coming from the West Coast. And we formed a nonprofit called the Fast Track Institute with Rodrigo Arboleda, who was the former CEO of One Laptop Per Child, and Maurice Ferre, who's the son of the 6-time mayor here. And basically what we do is we go into public sector situations and we try and solve that immune system problem. It takes 16 weeks, because it's public sector, but it turns out it works. So we run it 4 times. My first thought was, okay, let's address corruption in Mexico City. And then my partners were like, wait a minute, like, try something small and bite-sized and try not to die in the process, right? So we worked with the Ruta N in Colombia, so in Medellin. The panel before me was really very interesting from that perspective. And we've run it 4 times in Medellin on transportation, financial inclusion, healthcare, and pollution. Then we actually ran it here last year, 16 weeks with the Mayor Jimenez and the City Council on how do you solve the transportation problem. Because they were about to lay down $8 billion of light rail, and we managed to kind of divert that and think about how do you think about electric scooters, small electric cars, electric bikes, and do procurement in a totally different way. And we're now launching those solutions. And we just finished that 16-week process with the President of Colombia and the Supreme Court to redo the justice system in Colombia. So we're kind of figuring out how to solve this problem. But I came here to talk really about governance and how do you think about the future of that. Because we have a much bigger problem on our hands, which is that democracy does not work in the future that we're living into. I just want to see a show of hands. How many of you agree with that statement or disagree with that statement? Okay, agree, right, disagree? Okay, a bunch of, well, most people don't know what I'm talking about, but let me try and explain. So we invented, so I think there's 4 things happening in the world today. The first is, we have a massive forcing function because of technology, right? In the 15th century, we had the printing press, and the Gutenberg moment, as it's called, completely changed the world. We democratized information, and that fundamentally changed civilization over the next century or so, because anybody could have access to literature and interpret the Bible in their own way, led to the Protestant movement and so on. But today I would argue we have 20 such Gutenberg moments hitting us all at the same time. Just solar energy changes everything. Then you add autonomous cars, then you add in blockchain and CRISPR and AI and robotics and neuroscience breakthroughs, et cetera. So I would argue we have 20 of these hitting us. Observation 2 is that our society is not set up to absorb this pace of change. Right? In fact, I would argue that every mechanism that we use to run the world, our civics and politics and legal systems and healthcare systems, education, intellectual property, you name it, all designed for a world a few hundred years ago. Every institution that we use to run the world today is breaking. So from a democracy perspective, we invented representative democracies when information was scarce. If you were in California or in Washington, D.C., you literally had no idea what was happening in California because the speed of a horse was as fast as you could find out. Right? So we had somebody ride across the country to say, here's what my people in Idaho are thinking, or whatever, and Congress met occasionally to give people time to cross the country. Well, today we have an abundance of information, which gets misused, misinterpreted, faked, and every major democracy in the world is broken. Right? India, where I'm from originally, is broken. The UK broke 2 years ago. The US breaking in front of our eyes. Brazil is breaking, et cetera. Right? And so this is a fundamental challenge, and it's a structural issue. Right? Democracies tend to make the right decisions, women's rights, et cetera, but they take a long time to get there because you have to bring the whole population along, right? And which takes time. And today we need to make decisions faster and faster. We don't have time to take decades to figure out what's the right thing to do when we have drones and CRISPR and so on, blockchain coming along. The second issue is that in a democracy of any kind, you tend to end up with high metabolism, short-term election cycles. Right? Nobody's thinking about what do you need 20, 30 years down the line in education, energy, water, et cetera, and you get into what's called short-termism. The same way Wall Street only looks at quarterly numbers and doesn't think about the long-term thing. We end up with a very extractionary economy as a result. The third is that any democracy relies on an educated population, and we have a big problem with that today. Right? So all of us in the back of our heads have a little organ called an amygdala, which is an old evolutionary mechanism that's constantly scanning for bad news. We evolved this on the plains of Africa when we were first running around in Africa. If you heard a noise in the bushes, you ran. Why? Because bad news could kill you. Good news does not kill you. If I miss a piece of good news, I might miss some fruit that I could eat. If I miss a piece of bad news, I die. Right? So we're actually 10 times more likely to pay attention to bad news than good news because we associate it with a survival mechanism. This is why Fox News does very well. If you watch Fox News, you're going to die this week, right? If you're really lucky, you'll last till next week, but then you're going to die next week, but you're going to die, right? If you watch CNN, Peter Diamandis, my partner, calls CNN the crisis news network, because when you can track every kidnapping and bank robbery in real time, high definition, streamed to 20 devices, you think the world is going to hell, and you vote based on that, and then you end up with Brexit or Trump or Bolsonaro in Brazil or whatever. And so we have a really fundamental structural issue, because as we privatize the media, and you get more and more dollars the more edgy your story is, both sides go further and further out to the edge. And there's no consequence to lying, so you can say things like, the migrants are bringing polio into the country, which has been eradicated for decades, or smallpox, which has been eradicated for decades. Complete 100% lies, but there's no consequence to that, right? And so this is why our systems are threatened, because you can't rely on that. The forcing function of technology is now driving and breaking more and more of our systems. Now, the big challenge is our existing leadership is not cut out for this. Right? They just don't cut the mustard on this. All of our leadership structures are teaching people how to manage through stable, predictable, incremental worlds, and the train is pulling into Black Swan Central, right? And so we have a really fundamental challenge. And I really do mean, when I say all our institutions are breaking, I really do mean that. Maybe the weirdest phone call I've received in this last few years is from the Vatican. The Pope has the oldest immune system in the world, right? As he tries to update that organization, he's had some interesting challenges on his hands. But with technology, we have life extension coming. And one of the conversations we had there was, hey, your business model is about selling heaven. As we have life extension, how are you going to sell heaven if people aren't dying as much, right? That's going to be quite a challenge for them to deal with. Or on a slightly lighter note, take the institution of marriage. We invented marriage about 9,000 years ago. And when that first surfaced as an institution, average lifespan was about 25 years old. So you got married and you had kids and you died. Marriage is not supposed to last 50, 60 years, right? That's basically state-sanctioned torture is what it is, right? And how do you update that? We have huge tensions around this. And so I could go on. But on a more serious note, you look at the rise of fundamentalism all over the world. The orthodox element in every religion is freaking out today, right? Jewish settlers, Muslim radicals, Christian evangelicals, Hindu nationalists in India, and they're all saying, I can't take it. I can't take this pace of change. Let's go back to an older time, right? When things were more understandable. And people would much rather be comfortable than happy, which is why we end up with there. Because when we see new technologies coming, our brain relates to it as danger, the amygdala freaks out, and we say, oh my God, autonomous cars, we should ban autonomous cars until we figure it out, because that car might kill somebody, right? The fact that we're killing 1.2 million people a year with car accidents today is kind of just ignored because we're used to that already. My favorite statistic about autonomous cars as they come along is that it turns out in the US, 50% of all legal court cases, 50% car accidents. And autonomous cars don't have accidents. So that could get rid of a bunch of lawyers, which will be really great also, right? So really interesting to see where we're gonna go. So the question is, how do we handle governance in this future? The kind of the final observation I've made after watching this, I interact with world governments a lot, I talk to CEOs a lot, et cetera, is that our nation states aren't set up for this world. You think about some of the bigger cities in the world, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Shanghai, Tokyo, those are bigger than almost any country was 100 years ago, right? The complexity of managing any country today is so insane, you simply can't get anything done. You have to move a whole population, there's too many conflicting interests. So where we think it ends up is you end up with city-states, right? You think about Mexico City is basically that. Miami is basically a city-state with the rest of Florida in a separate type of a modality around it. We see the same with major cities all around the world. The outcome of Trump or Brexit was not left versus right. It was really rural versus urban is really the distinction. And that's the tension happening in the world. So I think what we're going to end up is we end up with a world where the nation states becomes de-emphasized, and then we increase the emphasis on city-states, which now can control enough of their environment to understand how to think about money supply. You don't really need to think about defense, et cetera, because the hidden gem in all of this, right, because I can be pretty dystopian if I want to, but there's really an amazing thing that's happening is that we are entering a world of abundance. Energy has been scarce for the entire history of humanity. With solar energy coming along, it is going to become abundant very quickly. And I don't know if you've had any discussions about solar, but solar energy is doubling in its price performance every 22 months today. And if you look at the history, it's been doing this for 40 years. So for 40 years, we've been doubling the price performance of solar energy roughly every 2 years. At that pace, we will be able to deliver 100% of world energy supply with solar in 13 years. In 13 years, right? Which totally changes global geopolitics, right? The Middle East collapses, the US has to find other reasons to go to war. I can make that joke as a Canadian, I can say that comment. But here you have something that's been scarce for the whole of history about to enter abundance, right? Now you have you see immediately right there the tension with the legacy, because Florida Light and Power lobbies the government and says you can't allow people to have solar on their rooftops because we're the Sunshine State, and that just wouldn't be right, right? We need to control that. In fact, in Spain, it is illegal to put solar panels on your own roof because the government gets so much tax from the utilities, the government can't afford to let you do that, right? And that's not a workable situation over time. And so where we're going to end up is we have technologies today like solar, blockchain, and others that are going to radically decentralize the world, and we're going to create a completely new set of institutions from the bottom up. And that's essentially how we're going to need to govern ourselves. The reason I'm excited about Miami is, if you think about Miami, it's basically the de facto capital of Latin America, right? Too much chaos in the countries down south. Not that there's not chaos here, at least its surface is over the water for at least the next few years. So we've got about a decade to figure out the rest of Latin America before Miami drowns in the ocean. But I think what we can do now is position Miami as the basic capital and figure out what should governance structures look like. And the thing that we've been working on, this solving this immune system problem, we're actually open sourcing it. We're writing a book that says, here's how you do it, and making it widely available, because every municipality, every legacy organization, every institution in the world needs to deal with that problem. right? And so I'm really, really optimistic because when you think about what's happening with this new wave of institutions and decentralizations, really the thing that will drive it is the startup community. You have the access to new technology, you have ability to get new technologies very, very inexpensively, and you can radically change the game on how to do this. The leading entrepreneur in the world today, Elon Musk, does this. He goes into a legacy environment with a beginner's mind. He has no expertise in that legacy environment, and he uses new technologies to totally mess with it and destabilize it, right? So no experience in the car industry, the space sector, the energy sector, and yet he's created market leaders in all of them. And that's what's possible today. If you're familiar with Ethereum, hopefully you know about Vitalik Buterin, the inventor. 18 years old, invents Ethereum, and now it's a $40 billion industry, right? And so this is what's possible today. And the way Elon does it is really simple. He looks at a technology that's accelerating exponentially and doubling very steadily, looks where will it be in 10 years, and he aims to build a capability and a business to intercept that curve in 10 years. And he's done a bunch of these, as you can see. The Hyperloop is the latest example where he's open sourced the design of that. He wanted to go in 20 minutes from LA to San Francisco at about 4,000 miles an hour. And to give you an example, I was chatting with him about this, and I said, Elon, I have a degree in theoretical physics. If you accelerate a human being from 0 to 4,000 miles an hour and then decelerate them back to 0 in 20 minutes, you're probably going to kill them. And his answer was, yes, it's an issue, right? That's the mindset, right? Now, the question is, can you take on that mindset? And nothing stops you today because these new technologies are so inexpensive. You can take on a big risk without a huge cost, which is a really magical capability today in whatever technologies you want to pick. So pick the area that you're really, really passionate about. Think about how would you want to change the world in a new way that would address one of our legacy institutions and go for it. And the reason that I think, the final reason that I think Miami is really, really exciting for this is that if you're going to build a business and if you're going to go really take on something magically huge, you really have to have passion. And here you have passion, right? Up in Canada, there's not a lot of passion up there. And so there's a huge advantage that you have in Latin America and just with Miami in general. And so with that, I hope you can think about that. With a massive kind of forcing function of technology, it's going to take out of many of our institutions. I think I've run out of time. If you have a question, I can try and take it. I'll have time for one quick question. Yell it out and I'll repeat it. The mic's coming. Okay.
Everything you say is very insightful, and I completely agree with everything regarding the future of democracy. So how are we going to go from, before I'm going to go back, I studied political science, and my professor once told me that democracy is not the best form of government, and I was surprised. I said, why aren't we using the best form of government? And with everything you're saying, now is a crucial time because whether it's climate change or very important subjects, how are we going to transform or transition from democracy to whatever is the best form of government if our leaders aren't going to allow it?
Yeah, so there's one modality. That's a great question. By the way, the full quote of that is democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else. And that's Winston Churchill, as usual, who said that. I think where we end up is there's one modality where democracy does work is with cities or with small states, right? Holland, Denmark, Israel, et cetera, et cetera. And so because everybody in a city kind of knows where they fit, and you can kind of get your heads around that. So we're going to end up back where I think we end up in the same way that, there's no medium-sized search engines. You're either Google or you're a little guy. There's no, the middle class is being hollowed out. You're either really rich or you're really poor, right? We're cutting out the middlemen in many cases, and I think nation states are the middlemen. What you'll end up with is a lightweight global world order governed by a kind of a parliament of mayors, and then everything else happening at the local level. And at that global level, you think about the reason the UN can't get anything done, it's a co-op of 190 countries. If you can't do anything in a country, how the hell are you going to do anything at the UN level, right? And so this is a really structural problem as we democratize down to that city level. So where we think we'll end up is cities kind of acting in cohesion, collaborating very, very aggressively, networking, et cetera. One of our faculty at Singularity kind of alerted me, at Fast Track, this nonprofit, we focus at the city level for this reason. He said, if you want to solve the grand challenges, hunger, poverty, healthcare, education, clean water, et cetera, you have to do them in cities. If you don't solve healthcare in cities, you don't solve healthcare. And he's completely correct as we have this urbanization move, et cetera. And I think Miami in a really interesting spot right now to be one of the world's leading cities in terms of how to use technology with a human sense of it to think about what should new structures look like in the rest of the world. Okay? I think we're going to be out of time. I'll be around for a bit if anybody has any questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.